We are now in the season of Epiphany, and in English tradition, Epiphany is often associated with wassailing customs, which I'll probably talk about in another video at some point. Well, quite some time ago, I decided to make wassail chicken, and you can see that in this image here. It's kind of like coq au vin, except that I've used cider and a little bit of brandy as well. You could use apple brandy in place of wine, so that it's chicken in stock with cider and brandy. And that was my first effort. Well, today I'm going to show you wassail duck, and this turns out to be a completely different story, and is not only much more complex and flavorful, but more exciting for me, and ends the Christmas season with a big bang. Let's start cooking. So the first time I bought a duck like this was in Buenos Aires, when I went to a market in Chinatown, and I saw the ducks frozen. I thought, oh, okay, I'll get one of those, and it was all bundled up and looked good, and I opened it up, and there we have a long neck and a head and a beak. And I had to figure what to do with it. So the first thing I have to do is chop it up into pieces so that I can saute it and then work from there. Okay, we can see now that that part wasn't complicated. I've taken off the neck and head and the feet, and so now it looks pretty much like any other kind of duck that you'd put in the oven in the UK or France or the United States. But I'm going to fillet out the breasts and the legs, and I'm going to saute them, and then I'm going to put the rest of the bones up in a pot along with the pieces I've already cut off, which I'll show you now. There we are, ready for a little bit of stock to be added, and we're going to make a broth. So you can see I've got the 4 pieces on paper towels just drying out. I'm going to leave them to air dry a little bit. I'll pat them dry before I start working on sauteing them. That'll take a little bit of while. Meanwhile, over here on the stove, you can see I've got the carcass and under it the feet and head in a little broth with some onions, and I'm going to make up a stock, which is what eventually is going to form the basis of the sauce, the apple sauce for the duck, and also duck soup. Duck soup in American English used to be a phrase meaning something done very quickly or very easily. I don't know why, but anyway, I'm not a big fan of duck soup, but I will make it and eventually put vegetables and whatnot in it. We'll talk about that as well, but that'll be tomorrow. Today is Epiphany, which is the day when I'm making this, because Epiphany is associated with wassail customs, and that's why I'm using apples, because wassailing involves mulled apples or apple orchards. So I'm going to leave everything to simmer for a while, and I will be back. Now, being the chameleon cook, I'm making this up as I go along. And I decided, as I was doing this, I chopped up the onions, and I thought, wait a minute, sage and onions. So I put sage in there as well, and I think that the sage is going to complement the apples really nicely. So I'm going to make the broth up, and then when that's on a nice simmer, I'll come back and we'll talk about sauteing the duck pieces. All right, so ready to get started now. We'll turn on stove, high heat. The duck has dried out quite considerably. Let's melt the butter, heat the oil. Combination of olive oil and butter can be a really nice combination because it maintains a high temperature and the butter provides a nice flavor and also aids in the browning. You know, all things considered, it's a good combination. Just going to let things heat up. Okay. I'll put each piece in skin side down to brown the skin first. Now what I'm doing is just searing. The cooking is going to happen in broth. Just keep checking. I'm going to do it on both sides, and then I'm going to add the broth. Alright, so the duck is all now completely browned, and I've added some leeks. You can use onions, I just prefer leeks generally. And I'm going to add some apples. Just one apple diced. I peeled it. I don't normally peel apples, but I peeled this one because I don't want the peels in the sauce. I'm thinking I'm going to reduce the sauce, and so the apples may mash down a fair bit, and I don't want the skins to be getting in the way of all of that. So I'm just going to get these all nicely coated, and then I'm going to add some broth. Okay, I'm just going to pour it in straight from the pan. Might splash a little bit. Okay. Okay, step one. Now I'm going to bring that back to a simmer, and then I'm going to add some cider. Now I'm suspecting that this will fizz up a little bit. It's not still cider, which I'm used to from Somerset or the Welsh borders. Fairly fizzy in general, so let's just see what happens. Okay, that wasn't too bad. I'm going to bring that back to a simmer, and I'm going to let it simmer for maybe 40 minutes, and then I will come back. Alright, so we've been simmering away here for about 40-45 minutes. I'm going to turn the stove off, I'm going to let things cool, and in fact I'm going to refrigerate overnight. I've noticed that there's a certain amount of fat, which of course is obvious because I used olive oil and butter. But I think there may also be a fair amount of duck fat from the broth. So I'm going to refrigerate, and then I'm going to take off the fat in the morning, and then I'm going to reduce the sauce because I don't want to thicken it. I want to make it nice and syrupy and place it over the duck pieces. So I will see you in the morning. So now it's the morning, and you can see that the fat has risen to the top and congealed in the refrigerator, so I can skim it off. And here you'll see that there's a pretty fair amount, and I'll use that at some other time for frying, or maybe for some kind of dish, I don't know. And the skimmed broth still has a little bit of fat on top because it's flavorful, and don't mind. I've taken most of it off. And I've also taken out the duck pieces because now I want to do the reduction, and I don't want the meat in the pan when I'm doing the reduction. Alright, so now this is the broth plus apples and leeks, but minus the fat, minus the duck pieces. I've put it on high heat, and I'm going to now try to make a reduction. I might at some point blend the apples and leeks into the sauce. I'm not quite sure yet. I'm going to see how the reduction goes. I'd like it to just reduce to syrup, but we'll see what happens. That's what happens with the chameleon cook. Don't know. So it's on high heat. I'll come back when it's in the process of reducing. Okay, well here we are back again. You can see actually it reduced extremely quickly. I was working in the other room and I thought I better just check on that, and it reduced in no time. So now I'm going to place the duck pieces back into heat and then plate up. So here is the plated masterpiece. I don't make a huge habit out of creating beautifully aesthetic presentations when I plate up, because I'm not a celebrity chef, I'm not a TV chef, I'm a home cook. And you'll see that the reduction is really dark. It's caramelized at the final stages, and the taste is magnificent. I cannot begin to describe to you the complexity of the broth, the leeks, the apples, the sage, all just a wonderful blend as it was reduced down, and very intense flavor, very, very powerful. It could be served both hot or cold. I've eaten some of the reduction cold, and it's really quite powerful. So that's a possibility as well. And serve with potatoes, peas, beans, red cabbage would be nice. And if you have liked this recipe, then by all means tell your friends. And if you have not subscribed already, then subscribe and tell your friends to subscribe. And I will see you next week for another Chameleon Cook, and I'll see you on Friday for a more in-depth look at the Bible and how to interpret it.